Hey Playas, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode of Playas Guide. This episode of Playas Guide, I'm going to do something that I've traditionally done annually on the channel, and that is a state of video game collecting, a year in review, and where video games are currently at for each console. So stick around. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break this down into all the major companies in this video and the major consoles of those companies that I have some knowledge about and can speak on. There are some that I'm not going to touch on, a little bit less popular or underrated consoles, simply because this video could go on for hours. And something that I've done in the past that I may not be doing in this video is really going very in depth into some of the games and some of the things that have affected the price of the general overview of where video games are at today in 2023. So we're going to head over to my favorite site for looking at prices of video games. You probably know it, and if you've been on the channel for a while, for sure you're familiar with price charting. So right here, I'm going to start off with Sony. We're going to go through all the Sony consoles. Maybe we're not going to do the handhelds, but we're going to do PS1 to PS4. I'll cover Xbox, some of the Sega consoles. Maybe just we'll see how much time we got. For sure, the Genesis and then all the major Nintendo home consoles will be covered here as well. All right, so let's get right into this. We've seen before some of the other videos you guys might have seen. The PS1 was cheapest around 2010 to 2012. Here, price charting says, is this 2013? No, 2012. 2013 started to go up a little bit. This is around the time nostalgia factor would have kicked in for the PS1. And it really, this is a lot of the people who are really into Sony, really into collecting for the PS1 right here, as the price is going up into 2017. And, again, a little bit of nostalgia factor. Here we saw that it plateaued a little bit, both on the median and the average price of games. So it was, the market was becoming established. Things went completely bonkers at the start of the pandemic, as it did for most video games, and a lot of people took notice of that. The thing about the PlayStation 1 is it's still going very strong. It looks like here the average and median show that it might be stabilizing. And this is something that I said I thought we would see in last year's video for 2022. And we did. We'll get to it for some of the consoles, but not so much the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation 1 still has games going up in value. Now, there's a lot of great games on it, and the reason I think that this is happening is because if you're collecting for the N64, Nintendo is the most popular gaming company to collect for, and they've been in the game the longest, so they have the biggest fan base. Completely understandable. Plus, tons of great games, obviously. Sony now has a history of producing a lot of great quality games and having good quality games on their consoles too. So Sony's, like, for me, Nintendo and Sony are the two big ones. And I think because of that, we're seeing reflected in the prices of some of the PS1 games, because it was the first Sony console. So if you're a Sony collector, a Sony gamer, and that's your system, and that's what you go to, or you appreciate it just as much as you do Nintendo, like I do, then there's some flagship titles that you're going to want to get and collect. And we've seen some of those get re-released and remastered too, like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot. So because Sony's a big name in the game and has a lot of staying power, I think that is one of the reasons why it's still going pretty strong. The other thing is if you're a Nintendo collector and you go for Nintendo 64, it's a smaller collection there's a lot of great stuff Sony got that we didn't get on Nintendo 64 to play. So a lot of those games, especially if you're into horror games, RPGs, JRPGs, shooters, side-scrolling platformers, fighting games. N64 had quite a few racing games. So did the PlayStation. Those were big at the time. But it had all of those other games that N64 didn't, really have a lot of. Like there was fighting games, but they didn't have like the Street Fighter games, a lot of the Capcom games, many RPGs. So there's a lot that you missed out on as an N64 gamer that you're going to be able to find on the Sony PlayStation 1. Now, this being said, we're going to move over to PlayStation 2. The dealio with PlayStation 2 right now is that it is hot. It is on fire. Let's take a look. So PS2 prices were very cheap down here in 2012, 2013. And I remember game stores at this time, just loads and loads of these games. Same with the Wii. The Wii was really starting to have an abundance of games and common games stacking up in video game stores. Now, you're not going to be hard pressed to find either of those now, but some of the more popular or rare games you will be, because not only did PS2 have nostalgia factor hit, and if you don't know what nostalgia factor is, I did a video on that too, explaining that. You might be able to figure it out too if you're quip and wise to video game collecting. It was coupled with the pandemic, so prices here we could see at the end of 2019, so 2020 to now, have just skyrocketed. They've gone nuts. Look at this jump. I mean, you can even look at the median here and see a significant increase. Now, we saw here there was a pretty big bump back in 2013, and I can only assume that that's because the PS2 games were just like kind of reminded me of when I started collecting for the NES. There was an abundance of them. They were like almost worthless. Like some of the stuff was just throwaway, common stuff that, game stores could not sell. People, obviously, collectors, started buying some of those games, seeing that it was the affordable console to collect for. Just like I think original Xbox and Wii was at that time too. So yeah, PS2 is really hot. I think for the rest of 2023, it's going to continue to go up. PS1 might slow down and lose a bit of momentum. PS2 will not. What do you think is going to happen to PS3? I think for PS3, we're going to see prices starting to go up now in 2023. The PS5 is out. It's not even a last generation console. It's the console before that. There is an abundance of these games, but we're starting to see what I was just talking about with the PS2, where there's like that little bump's going to happen because that abundance is going to start disappearing if it hasn't already, because collectors are wise to this. They're noticing that if they stay ahead of the game for video game collecting, they can get a lot of these games before they jump in price. And that is where the PS3 is at right now. You could see here where the average price is in 2008. They're still putting out PS3 games, but it's just been a gradual decline. And the past few years, maybe 5 years ago now, back in 2018 here, 2019, and 2017. So that span of 3 years, you could see that's where the abundance was, where everybody's, if they didn't have a PS4, they're probably getting one, or, the PS5 that gamers know is on the horizon. So they're getting rid of their PS3 games, trying to trade them in for something better, maybe a Switch or the PS4 that they didn't get, because it's time. It's time. If you want to stay current with gaming, you're going to need that next generation console. But now, here's the collectors, trying to grab some of the rares, uncommons, popular flagship games that they want to have on the PS3. boosting the price up a bit. But PS3 is still very affordable. If you're looking for an affordable console to collect for, go for the PS3 this year, because I think in the next 2 years we're going to see that nostalgia factor starting to kick in. It happens to every console that we've seen. It does fizzle out for some of the older consoles, but things like the PS1, the NES, Genesis that I have touched upon or will be touching upon, it it doesn't affect those as much. Could they dip? Yes. Is the bubble going to burst and all these games are going to be worthless and you're going to go to a game store and see value bins full of them? Never. It's not going to happen. The bubble burst theory, it's, could prices over the next 20 years go to half of what they are now? Absolutely, that could happen. But that ain't a bubble bursting. A bubble bursting is it hits a climax, bursts, and then is worthless, worth nothing. You can't get rid of the stuff if you wanted to. Um, anyways, I've discussed that too before on this channel. There's no bubble. Prices could drop for some of the popular consoles that are iconic and recognizable throughout the gaming community, from small children to grandparents. Those are the consoles that are, have the staying power and are going to hold the value the best. Okay, so there's the PS3 for you. Let's go take a look at what Microsoft has going on, right? Xbox, the original OG Xbox. So, as I mentioned, here we can see back in 2012, 2013, prices were cheap, just like the Wii and PS2 for the Xbox. That generation. Now, Microsoft here had a little bit, I know the Wii and PS2 and original Xbox sort of overlapped there with the Xbox 360. And because of that, and because Xbox was still, and I guess still is, the newcomer in terms of the big three gaming brands to the game, needed to do a little bit of catching up. So that's why that happened a little bit later on. But, the collectors started going after some of the games because they were cheap here throughout the years. And we saw that jump in 2019 and 2020. Here's the thing about Xbox. I do think there's a lot of exclusive games, a lot of good games on the Xbox, and I think people are going to be going after that stuff. There's a lot of filler too, and it's hard to say how much staying power the OG Xbox is really going to have. And the reason is because I believe, and I've mentioned this in other videos before, and you may have heard other people talk about this before, Microsoft has a strong stake in building up their cloud-based streaming, so game streaming, and they want to be, and they will be, I think, the flagship company to do so, where your games are all just basically subscription-based. You don't own anything, and we've seen them buy different companies and not really do anything with them, such as Rare. We'll see what happens here with Activision Blizzard. Just because they want the library. They don't have the big library that Nintendo or Sony has because they are newer to the game. They recognize that they're trying to build up this big library to get you to subscribe to their streaming service. And the Xbox will eventually, all of these gaming consoles kind of are just media devices at this point, but the Xbox will specifically be a media console you'll have your gaming as a streaming service and all your movies and stuff as a streaming service, and it's just an entertainment box, which isn't a bad thing. It's just a very different thing from what we've seen. I think that's where Xbox is going, and because of that, I don't know that these Xbox games are going to hold up as well in collectors' eyes as something like an NES or a PS1 or even the Sega Genesis. So Xbox 360 is the dirt cheap console to collect for. I was not a fan of this console. I had a friend who got it day one, and over the course of the first year, he had it break down on him 5 times, had to send it in, eventually got a replacement, which I do think broke down maybe 2 years later or something. And that turned me off because I was already having some issues, the red ring of death, with the original Xbox. And at that time, I was not as interested in modern games, so I was very strongly invested in collecting for things like the NES, and it really took off for me at that time. So because of that, I personally don't have a lot of nostalgia for the 360, other than a few games that came out around the time it was new, and I sort of dipped out of gaming at this time and just went retro and went into collecting, which in hindsight was a good move. There are a few games I need to catch up on and didn't get to play, but look at if I want to play them now, I could play them and own them very cheap. So, that's just where the 360's at. This is a console I don't think is going to pick up in the next year or two. The nostalgia factor is not going to hit the 360 as hard as it hit the PS3 for multiple reasons. Sony has the bigger fan base, was releasing a lot of great games that, you know, Last of Us, there's an HBO series of that right now. The 360 is kind of where we saw Halo, which was the flagship franchise. I don't want to. I want to. I'm gonna say it. Die. Like after the 360, what did they release on Xbox One for Halo? I know there was that one game, but it never really took off. So, um, everybody I know had original Xbox at 360 who loved their Xbox was playing a Halo game on them. And I don't know how they dropped the ball on that, but they did because you look at how big shooters are nowadays, and that is the most popular genre in gaming. 360 will see some nostalgia factor at some point, but because it was unaffected by the pandemic, this nostalgia factor won't be as strong as it is for a Nintendo or Sony console. These games, I think, will be a cheaper alternative for years to come. So we could take a look at the Xbox One because it is a last generation console, and this is one that I barely played at all because I'm completely uninvested at this point in Microsoft. Um, and this is where we're seeing less and less flagship titles and different franchises under the Microsoft Xbox brand, and that reflects here. There, I don't think that they were crushing it like the Switch and PS4, and I still don't think they are with the Series X. I could be wrong, but I would say the Switch and PS5 are the most popular consoles now, and you can even throw the PS4 into that conversation because they're still putting out AAA blockbuster games that you could play on your PS4. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what their strategy here was. I think Xbox was trying to figure out a strategy, and they're working towards the streaming service that I'm talking about with the Xbox Series X, um, and that's they're fully invested in that. That being said, these are going to be cheaper games to collect for. It's really hard to say here what's going to happen to Xbox. They just don't have the fan base that Nintendo and Sony have built up. Now, I'm talking about collecting here. In terms of gaming, the streaming thing could really take off. I think that Microsoft will be the biggest company in that space, right? And will occupy the largest share portions of game streaming at soon. If they don't already, it's just going to grow. So, that being said, do not underestimate Microsoft in the world of gaming and the future of gaming. But in terms of collecting, they're not offering really a lot for collectors, especially if they are going that route. Okay, let's take a look at the Sega Master System because just a few years ago, this was a very underrated console to collect for, which, as we can now see on price charting, a lot of people have taken notice of that. A lot of collectors. It's a smaller library to collect for. And it has a lot of good 8-bit games, just like we saw with the NES, but much smaller library. Nintendo was just pumping them out at the time, and Sega was still able to bring, some level of competition to that. Anyways, so at the beginning of the pandemic, people weren't really going after the Sega Master System. I guess maybe not just through my videos, but people caught wind or observed by going on sites like this that, um, you know, it's one of the more affordable consoles to collect for and one of the better if you're into retro gaming. And it's gone up quite a bit. I mean, price charting here really shows that it's shot up, but I would say I still find a lot of the games to be quite affordable. And if you are going for a full set, um, I don't think it would really be, you would really be breaking the bank. There's a few games here, the more rare ones, that have gone up in price. But I mean, let's just look here at some of these. Like, we got Alex Kidd and Shinobi World, the Blue Label, Golden Axe Warrior, Elf. Elf you probably get under $100. So I mean, under $200 for a lot of them. James Buster Douglas is the one that's you're gonna break the bank on. Even that, in comparison to a lot of these other consoles, if that's the rarest game and you were going to NES and you were like looking at a stadium events, or you went to Super Nintendo and you're looking at an Arrow Fighters or a Donkey Kong competition or Sculptor's Cut on N64, or whatever you're looking at, this is peanuts compared to that. It's really, you're not going to be spending all that much. Although I will say this about Sega, I'd be looking at these prices, which are significantly more. The CIB, that's what I'd be going after. But still, nothing that you can't put a little bit of cash aside for and save up to get by the end of the year. And it's one that I've been also contemplating collecting, and I think a lot of other collectors are. Now, here on price charting, we are seeing on the average a bit of a dip. So that might mean some of the more expensive ones are coming down because we don't see that reflected on the median. But again, this is something that we could take another look at and do a deep dive into the state of Sega Master System collecting. And that's something that I would consider doing. Sega Genesis here. This is what I was mentioning before I was talking about the Microsoft stuff. Genesis has just kind of slowly been going up and up and up. Got a bit more of a boost during the pandemic, and it's still, I mean, here price charting shows that it looks like it's dipping a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens for a lot of consoles this year, as we are entering a recession. Um, you know, People might need money. They might be letting go of some of the more valuable titles, which would bring down the average on price charting for different consoles, and just not looking to buy as many games. So I do think there will be a cool off and a plateau that we're going to see um, right across the board, with the exception of maybe the PS2 and GameCube this year. But I don't think that they will have the momentum that they have had for the past 3 years. They won't be as hot. But I do think those prices will still slowly continue to creep and rise, especially for the popular and harder to find games. Here we are over at the NES. Let's take a look here. This is a little bit more surprising than I thought. I was expecting a bit of a dip here. It's more of a plateau. There's maybe a slight dip. I was thinking, NES has been hot for so long. Even through the pandemic, prices just went nuts. People were complaining about prices before. Who on earth is buying these games and going for a complete collection in 2023 unless your pockets are lined with gold? But people love the NES. They're finding ways to buy, sell, trade, and budget. I love that word, budgeting, for the games they want or need in order to collect for a complete collection. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why the NES is so strong, because it has that strong fan base of just regular collectors that will find a way out there game hunting, searching for deals. And as long as that exists, which it will for a long time, prices may come down during a recession. That's just a reflection of the market. But, we'll never, ever see that bubble burst on the NES. Now, the bubble bursting for some people might be like, oh, well, it went down back to pre-pandemic prices. To me, that's still expensive, and for a lot of long-time collectors, I can remember looking at prices then in 2019, 2018, and thinking, wow, I can't imagine this getting any higher. And people online saying, oh, prices are going to come down, the bubble's going to burst, it's going to cool off. Well, obviously that didn't happen and is not ever going to happen. Maybe in 20 years, when you're in your 50s, 60s, or some people are in their 70s, and they just, there isn't the need to pass. Like, I don't know. I'm just speculating. This is like a whole other topic I could get into about 20 years from now where collecting is at. But I can tell you 20 years ago when I was rummaging through value bins at video stores, which back then in the early 2000s we already seen the mom and pop shops were starting to die off, and the bigger video store chains were still around, and they were liquidating a lot of that stuff, old video games, VHS and things of that sort. That's when I got into it, and it's like it's a night and day difference where things are at now. I could have never fathomed that this would happen. Back then I was just looking for somebody who would know some of these games or appreciate that it's an interest of mine, and that really didn't exist. So it's really cool to see that you could go on to something like YouTube now and build a community around that of other like-minded people. So yeah, NES. I think it could cool off a bit, but it has the staying power. Super Nintendo too. Super Nintendo. Here's the thing. A couple years ago, I said, "Hey, Super Nintendo has not been affected as much. It wasn't as hot as the NES was at the time, or the N64. But I think people have taken notice of that, just like they did with the Master System." And a lot of retro gamers and collectors recognize that in comparison to a lot of other consoles, there's a lot of good games here that are still very affordable. And that's caused the price to continue to go up on the Super Nintendo. Now, I don't think that it is going to continue that momentum as strongly. I think the Super Nintendo is more likely to see a dip or a plateau before the NES, and I want to say before N64, but it's hard to say because it's for collectors. A lot of people go for full N64 sets, and it's much easier to collect all the N64 games than Super Nintendo or NES. Yeah, that's where the Super Nintendo's at, guys. It's got its momentum back right there around halfway through the pandemic. It got hot again. People are recognizing, hey, everything else is too expensive. Super Nintendo's great. But the one thing I will say about Super Nintendo that I've noticed is, and I actually did a video talking about this, I think it was like a year and a half or 2 years ago, that some of the really rare games that you don't see on the Super Nintendo are like Street Racer, Head-On Soccer. Some of them, like the Hurricanes, people have caught on to, but these were Oscar. I mean, I could keep going on and naming them, but they weren't really going up. In fact, some of them had gone down in price. And now we're seeing, well, some of those people still haven't, other than the collectors going for full sets, the serious Super Nintendo collectors. But the majority of collectors, I don't think, have really caught on to what some of the rares are on the Super Nintendo. It has its flagship staple titles, like games like Super Metroid, Link to the Past, that have really gone up, and a lot of people are going for. And that is really driving the price up. But now I see some people recognizing some of those I guess hidden rares and some of the hidden gems on the console. And those two things are driving this one up. But I do think it will cool off this year or next year. We're going to see it cool down. We'll find out. If you're subscribed to the channel, you can watch back next year when I do another video like this. So here's what I'm talking about with the N64. Nostalgia factor hit, driving it up, right? 2013, I'd say even 2012, it started going up. that's when I was finishing it off because I saw, hey, if I'm going to finish this set, I got to do it now because prices are, they're going up and they're going to be out of reach for me personally. Maybe not for some of you people watching who are collecting through this time. But anyways, I would I recognize that because I collect on a very small budget, and if you've seen some of my videos, you know that. Um, the pandemic, there's a nostalgia factor just going wild. The pandemic hit, and I think it just got way too big and way too hot too fast, and that's why you're seeing this drop here. Um, because it shouldn't have gone up here. And what this was I looked at this a couple months ago. There was a few expensive games. One of them, I think, was the test cartridge that just sold for an astronomical amount of money, more than double what it's worth. So that made the average look like this, where it just dropped because the next one that sold was thousands of dollars less, affecting the average of all of the games collectively. So what we want to be looking at here is the median. But as we look at the median, you can see that is reflected there, but it has plateaued and sort of cooled off. I think that's what's going to continue. So really, the N64 has dropped, but I don't think it's going to see the momentum because there's not as many games for people to go after. And the other thing too, as we journey across the history of gaming, traditionally there's been more and more games produced, with the exception of some consoles that maybe did not sell so well and flopped. They may have had smaller print runs, and then there's also the weird thing where some games there were more printed than there were consoles. But we're not going to get into that. The the case is that generally more and more people have bought into gaming and are playing games than there were in, let's say, 1985, or sorry, let's say 1983. So 40 years ago and 20 years ago, if we look at 2003, there was more people gaming then than 20 years before. So that being said, there's more N64 games out there. A lot of people collecting for it still too, but it's smaller collections, so it's easier for those people to complete. And it didn't really quite reach the height that NES reached, or even the GameCube. Let's take a look at the GameCube. So the GameCube is one that I think will still remain hot here, even in 2023. There you go. GameCube, very hot. And I think this is one, just like the PS2, that will continue to go up. Maybe not like, look at how steep this upward curve is. It may not have that steep of an upward trend, but we will see it to continue to go up for the next year or two. And then I would not be surprised if prices cooled off a little bit and tapered down, because GameCube is quite expensive to collect for now, but it also has that bigger library than the N64 to keep collectors interested and coming back for more games to add to their collection. Myself, I wasn't a big fan of the GameCube. Not that I don't like the console, but when they came, the N64, GameCube, Wii, even the Wii U, as much as I like that console and it's near and dear to me, I really kind of saw Sony doing what was, I guess, traditionally accepted as gaming, and staying strong in the gaming scene and communities, and I sort of flipped over there. But I liked all the cartridge based Nintendo stuff, and always will. And that's where I sort of collect now. Okay, so you know that the GameCube is hot. Let's take a look at the Wii, because the Wii last year was not. And it looks like, we're getting a little bit of momentum on the Wii. A lot of people don't want to collect for the Wii because there is a large amount of shovelware. But I want to say that there's probably around 200 to 250 really great playable games and hidden gems and some rarities on the Wii that you want to collect for. But then there's like 1,000 other games that are garbage that you don't want. and are just going to take up space in your game room. So we will go up. We will see this one increase in price over the next year or two, but it's still going to remain pretty affordable. So if you're looking for something to collect, that might be an option. The Wii U, on the other hand, so we're going to see exactly what I'm talking about with the size of the library, is going to be more popular. And we can see that here, right there, boom. The Wii U is just building momentum, and this is because it has a lot of good games in proportion to the number of games. It has probably the most playable and fun games in proportion to outweighing the not so great games than almost any other console. I would say any other console, because there's 163 games, right, on the Wii U. And I want to say that half of those games, at least, are games that I could pick up and play at any time and enjoy, and haven't really aged poorly either, whereas the other half haven't. So how many libraries of consoles can you say 50% of the games are good, great, very playable? Not many. And because it's a small library, still relatively affordable to collect for, it's going to be going up a lot in the next few years. A lot of collectors are noticing this. Now, that may fizzle out in the next 3 or 4 years. Nostalgia factor, I'm sure, will come in there at some point and give it a bump in the next 3 or 4 years. But then after that, I think it's going to cool off and fizzle down, because it's such a small library, that, and a lot of people who want these Wii U games already have their complete collection, or are on their way to having it, and only maybe a few games away, because it's not that big of a library, so it doesn't make it that hard to complete. And if you just budget for it, like I did a whole series on it, then you'll see. The Wii U is a good collection to have. The discs are very durable. The demand is there for it. Now, that's it for today. I'm not going to get into the Switch or the other current generations, because games are still coming out. It's a lot of speculation. I could talk about that in future episodes of Playas Guide. So look for that, or recommend things that you'd like to see in the comments below. There's also a Playas Guide Discord that you can join, linked below, as well as Playas Guide Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all the social media platforms that everybody's promoting. You could find Playas Guide there. So please consider following the channel. That is it for this week's episode. I tried to keep it as brief as I could. That's why I didn't go in too deep into any of these. But you can see some videos where I do go in a little bit deeper. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the flip side.